Welcome back to Teach Me the Bible Stories with Miss Michelle. Today we will look at Genesis chapter 11 verses 1 through 9. We're going to find out why there are so many different languages spoken in the world today. Now there will be 10 questions at the end. You can earn 100 points today, so listen carefully. First, some Bible basics. In our last video, we learned that the first 5 books of the Bible are called the books of the law. And those books of the law are written by Moses. Moses wrote down God's words. And those books of the law are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, why am I doing sign language? Because I think those are going to help us to not only learn the books of the Bible, but also to learn what those books are about. Now, law, you've already seen me do that. Your palm, you're making an L shape at the top of your palm and then the bottom, okay? So there's 5 books of the law, and the first book is Genesis. Genesis, you're making the sign language for to start or to begin, because Genesis is all about the beginning, okay? Exodus is about when the Israelites exited Egypt. So this is our symbol for Exodus. All right, let's do those two together. Genesis, Exodus. Now Leviticus is really instructions to the priest. And so this is our symbol for Leviticus, or same symbol for priest. Now the Jewish priests did not wear collars like the Catholic priests do today. But that's still going to be our symbol to help us remember that Leviticus is about instructions to the priest. Let's do all 3. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Okay, you ready for Numbers? Numbers is about, well, it starts off where the Israelites were counted. There was a census done, and then it ends with the Israelites being counted, where there was a census done. So this is the sign language for to count. Okay, let's do all 4. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. And then the 5th book of the law is Deuteronomy, okay? And Deuteronomy is the second law. What it was is Moses had given the law in Exodus, but he repeated it again in Deuteronomy, because in Exodus it was to their parents, and then a whole new generation was there in Deuteronomy. So Moses needed to repeat the law, okay? Let's do all 5. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. One more time, okay? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We'll keep working on that, but good try. Okay, you ready for today's story? This story is from the Bible, God's holy word. Now, do you remember from our last video where we learned that Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives, and all the animals that were on the ark were on that ark for almost 1 whole year. Everyone and everything in the ark was saved, but everyone and everything outside of the ark died in the flood. But Noah and his family were saved from the flood because Noah found favor with God. God gave Noah instructions to build the ark, and Noah did everything God told him to do. But when Noah and his family got out of the ark, God gave them instructions. And God said, "Be fruitful, multiply in number, and fill the earth." Okay? So what did God tell Noah and his family to do when they walked out of the ark? God said, "Be fruitful and multiply in number and fill the earth." They were supposed to spread out and fill the earth. In Genesis chapter 10, we see that Noah's sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth were fruitful and increased in number. But unfortunately, they did not fully obey God's commands because they did not fill the earth. They were supposed to spread out and fill the earth, but instead they stayed together. In fact, they stayed near the foothills of the mountains of Ararat where the ark had landed. Now, what part of the command did Noah's sons and their children not obey? they did not spread out and fill the earth. Genesis 11 begins by telling us that the whole world had one common language. Only one language was spoken. Everyone spoke the same language and everyone understood one another. And the descendants of Noah's sons said to each other, "Come, let's build ourselves a city so that we will not spread out over the face of the earth. And let's build a high tower that reaches to the heavens so that we can make a name for ourselves and be famous." So how many languages were spoken in the world at that time? Only one. And because everyone shared one language, they were able to work together and they came up with new and better ways to build things. And they learned how to make bricks and to bake them thoroughly so that those bricks would be hard and useful for building. So what did the people learn to do that made building much easier? They learned to make bricks. But the Lord looked down and was upset with what he saw. You see, they were not obeying God. Instead, they were making a plan to disobey God. They were building this city so they did not have to spread out and fill the earth. They were building a city so that they could all live together. And they were building a tower so that they could make a name for themselves and be famous. They were wanting to be praised and worshiped. They wanted to receive praise and worship. They were not praising and worshiping the Lord God. The Lord God is the only one who deserves praise and worship. So what was the reason the people were building a city? So they did not have to obey God's command. They were building a city so that they could all live together and not spread out and fill the earth. And why were they building a high tower? To make a name for whom? To make a name for themselves. They were trying to receive praise and worship. But who is the only one who deserves praise and worship? The Lord God. God looked down and said, "Let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand one another." God confused their language so that they spoke many different languages instead of just one. The people couldn't understand one another. And in their frustration of not understanding each other, they spread out and filled the earth, just like God had told them to do. They stopped building the city at that time, and the city was then named Babel because the Lord confused the language there. Now, why was it called Babel? Because when the people spoke, people sounded like they were babbling, not making any sense. And that tower was named the Tower of Babel. Okay, what did God do to make sure that the people spread out and filled the earth? God confused the language. One language became many different languages. And when the people realized that they couldn't understand each other, what did the people do? They spread out and filled the earth, just like God had originally told Noah and his family to do. And what do we call the city and that tower in that city? Babel, and the Tower of Babel. To tell you the truth, this story has frustrated me at times because I have attempted to learn Spanish on and off at different times in my life, and I'm still can only talk like a toddler, not very good at all. I lived 2 years in Germany and had to learn the German language, and I cried many different times because I was so frustrated with how hard it is to learn a language, especially as an adult. My husband and I lived for 7 years in Madagascar, and there we learned the Malagasy, the language spoken in Madagascar. And each and every time I've had to learn a new language, I've thought about this story. And I've thought, what if Noah's sons had obeyed God immediately? What if they had just went ahead and spread out and filled the earth? Then maybe we could all be speaking one language. But the truth is, it's very unlikely that one language would be English. Maybe Hebrew, the language that the Old Testament was written in, but we don't even know that for sure. All we know is that today there are about 6,500 different languages spoken in the world today. That's 6,500. So it went from 1 to 6,500. And the reason goes all the way back to those people who made a plan to build a city so they did not have to obey God's command to spread out and fill the earth. And they built a tower to make a name for themselves instead of trying to make a name for God, the one who created them and loved them and who deserves praise and worship. I hope this reminds you that it's always best to obey God the first time He tells you to do something. God really does want what is best for us. We should be quick to obey because we trust Him and we trust that all of His commands are for our good. But we should also trust that God is in charge and there are consequences to not obeying Him. So let's avoid those bad consequences and obey God immediately. Let's be quick to obey. Okay? Are you ready for your 10 questions? Hit the pause button if you need more time after each question. Number 1, what did God tell Noah and his family to do after they walked out of the ark? God said, be fruitful and increase in number and what? Time, fill the earth. Spread out and fill the earth. They were supposed to spread out and fill the earth. Number 2. What part of that command did Noah's sons and their children not obey? Time. They did not fill the earth. They did not spread out and fill the earth. Number 3. How many languages were spoken in the world as Genesis 11 began? Time, only 1. Number 4. What did people learn to do that made building much easier? Time, they learned to make bricks, okay? Number 5, what was the reason the people were building a city? Do you remember? What was the reason the people were building a city? What was their purpose for that? Time, so they did not have to obey God's command. They were building a city so they could all live together and not spread out and fill the earth. Number 6, and why were they building a high tower? To make a name for whom? Time, a name for themselves. Number 7, they were trying to receive praise and worship. But who is the only one who deserves praise and worship? Time, the Lord God. Number 8, what did God do to make sure people spread out and filled the earth? Time, God confused the language. One language became many different languages. Number 9, when the people realized they couldn't understand each other, what did the people do? Time, they spread out and filled the earth. Then they obeyed what God had told them to do. Number 10, what do we call the city and the tower in that city? Time, Babel, and the Tower of Babel. Okay, how many did you get right? Now multiply that by 10 and that's your score. Now I have 2 assignments. I want you to go read Genesis chapter 11 verses 1 through 9. Then I want you to go tell someone what you learned today. Come back for our next video in our Teach Me the Bible Story series. See you next time.